Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Milwaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Leg Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Immigrants without Social Security numbers will notice big changes when filing taxes this year. Today, we'll learn why and what's changed. Then we'll look at how people in Minneapolis are responding to the large-scale ICE operation in their city and what Milwaukeeans can learn from it.
This collective outrage that got a lot of people who wouldn't ordinarily consider themselves protesters or activists off the sidelines and into the streets.
Plus, we'll learn about the documentary American Reckoning, which investigates the unsolved murder of a civil rights activist.
The civil rights movement is often a tale of a few iconic figures, but there were actually foot soldiers all over communities all over America.
All that's coming up on Leg Effect. This is Leg Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us today. The One Big Beautiful Bill, which was passed last year, drastically cuts social safety net programs. Some of those impacts are being felt during tax season. The bill limits the federal tax credits that ITIN holders are eligible for. And ITIN provides taxpayers without legal status the ability to file taxes. To make sense of this year's changes and how they'll impact immigrants, WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez is joined by Cristina Villanueva, owner of Ambas Financial Services here in Milwaukee.
ITIN is a system that was brought up many years ago with the IRS for those who are not eligible to receive a Social Security number. So you would get an identification number to identify you when you would declare your tax return, whether that's because you have a business and you have to declare your federal taxes, state taxes, self-employment tax, etc., and you currently don't have the capability to get a Social Security number. This is a way that the IRS decided that this is how they were going to start doing this. And what has happened from there is that now people who have an ITIN are eligible to also declare their tax return as a W-2 employee as well. And say they have children, they are able to declare certain credits. So ITIN holders are those who are currently in the process of possibly getting a Social Security or are not eligible currently for a Social Security.
And this is also the first tax season for those holders in Trump's big, beautiful bill and the changes that they're kind of facing. What are the changes that ITIN holders or folks without Social Security numbers should know about and that you're seeing them kind of work their way through in a new tax season, unprecedented tax season?
Sure. I always say that, immigrants are always going to be that target, but when it comes to taxes, we're seeing it a different change this year. So usually an ITIN holder claims their children, say that we're a married couple. I have an ITIN, my husband has an ITIN, and we have 3 children that are here in the United States that were born here, they're legal. We would qualify usually for the child tax credit. In this situation, the child tax credit is no longer eligible, even though the kids are U.S. citizens. They do not qualify for the child tax credit because both of the parents are ITIN holders. So that makes a big difference. The one thing that I do want to say is that if both of them have an ITIN and they have kids who have a social, they're still eligible for the other dependent credit, which is $500. So it's still important for you to do your tax return whether or not you get the credits and making sure that you know which credits you are eligible based on the changes that have happened. If one person has a Social Security number and the other person has an ITIN, they will qualify for the child tax credit.
So then the partner would be the person applying for the child tax credit. Okay. Also thinking about ITINs and sharing what could be very sensitive information. And there's long been this promise from the IRS that this information won't be shared, it won't be weaponized against you. What are you seeing from clients this year when it comes to filing taxes and sharing that information?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention, but the ITIN was started back in July of 1996. And for the longest time, since 1996 till we're now in 2026, there was always this relationship between the safety of an ITIN holder becoming very vulnerable and saying, hey, I don't have a valid social, I am possibly in the process, but I'm still going to declare my tax return. And the IRS stated as its own agency would not share information that has to do anything with your immigration status. So even to declare yourself, the definition that the IRS has to declare yourself as a resident, when you're going to be declaring yourself as a tax return, it has nothing to do with whether you have a Social Security or not for status of declaring income. But there's one thing that's happening is that the trust in the people that you said, hey, your information is safe with us. You're here declaring your tax return. We know where you live. We know what you do. We know your children you have. And to have an administration come in and say, well, we're going to possibly use that information against you. That's where there's fear. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there as well, because the only reason the immigration is going to be working with the IRS is if they have a criminal background, etc. They require IRS to give them information of where is this individual. But they're not going after people just because they're declaring a tax return. That's very important that we say that. Another thing is that the information is already out there. So if you're not going to do your tax return, it's going to be worse because the IRS knows that, hey, Christina always does this W-2. Christina's didn't do her W-2 this year. We don't know if she's declaring children or not. So we're going to put her single with no dependents. Now that's going to have a tax bill. Now I'm going to have a tax liability. Not only that, but now I'm going to have fees for late filing, for non-compliance, and then I'm going to get a big tax bill when I could have avoided this if I would have done my tax return. So there's a lot of misinformation out there where people are like, no, don't do your taxes because they're not going to give you any money and because they're going to come after you and stuff like that. And I say, no, at the end of the day, you're not doing your taxes because whether or not you get money or not. You're doing your taxes because that is the right thing to do as you are earning income here in the United States. I always say, talk to your accountant, talk to your tax professional, because there's strategies that you can use so that you don't owe money at the end of the year.
Just hearing you talk about that, and I was in the office and I heard you on a call just before we started this conversation, and you do the accounting, but you also act, I would say, as like a community therapist of sorts, of like trying to convince people or trying to talk people down, whatever anxiety that they're feeling in this moment, because it is so different, and sharing this information. It got me thinking about when you talked about misinformation, as well as something that either gets lost in these conversations, is the economic impact that I-10 holders and immigrants have more largely within society. So from a tax revenue and social services point of view, what do we know about the economics of I-10 holders?
So one of the biggest things is that we all know that ITIN holders are clearly working and they're still contributing to their Social Security and Medicare, right? So let's just make sure we note that. And one way we can note that is by, if we look at the contribution that was back in 2022, where we had approximately 3.8 million tax returns filed with ITIN, that was $6.5 billion in Social Security and Medicare. Again, I'm going to let that sit in. You're talking about 3.8 million tax returns were filed with an ITIN, and they contribute $6.5 billion to Social Security and Medicare. Now, remind you, an ITIN holder does not have the capability to get health insurance for free. They do not have the capability to apply for unemployment. They don't have the capability to be able to apply for Social Security. So this is money that it's clearly helping our economy, because we do understand that we're in a situation where we have a lot of people who depend on Social Security and Medicare. So the system here, they knew exactly what they were doing as they were going to start the ITIN policy that they put in place. Why? Because it's a contribution. The impact that immigrants have is huge.
What's something that you're keeping your eye on in the future, and that's something that would help Latinos and I-10 holders going forward?
I mean, we all can dream, right? And I'm a big believer that there needs to be a change. And I hope that in my lifetime I'm able to see. I feel I'm very young still. That I'm able to see in a couple of years some sort of new laws that have to do with giving the opportunity to the people that have been here for so many years. And we have our DACA recipients that every new presidential election, they're worried about the whole situation of, will they remove my DACA or not? Continue to be that target. So what I'm hoping is that there is a program in place where they give them work authorization, and not only just their work authorization, but they allow them to become residents of the United States for all the years that they have been contributing to this country. So that is my hope, that in the future we stop dealing with the situation of immigrants always being this target, but understanding that those that have been here for so long can have the capability to get their residency and become future U.S. citizens of this country that we have.
Cristina Villanueva is the owner of Ambas Financial Services. She spoke with WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez about the changes for ITIN users this tax season. The Department of Homeland Security claims it is winding down its ongoing ICE operation in the Twin Cities. But ICE agents have continued patrolling communities, armed with guns and chemical weapons that they've used on protesters and bystanders alike. The people of the Twin Cities have continued to resist, with whistles, protests, and informal neighborhood networks. These groups have organized to aid their most vulnerable neighbors who fear persecution by federal agents. For journalist Dan Simmons, these scenes in the Twin Cities have hit home, literally. Simmons grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and he returned to his hometown to report on what's happening there and what Milwaukeeans can learn from this operation in case it happens here. Simmons joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers to explain.
What has it been like for you going back to your hometown, really, and seeing what's happening?
Surreal and kind of like a big reunion. You realize how small a town it is. I haven't lived there for 25 years. I still have a lot of family there. And everywhere I went, I ran into people who I knew from college or, my priest from first grade, spoke at a rally. And just the general scene is indescribably chaotic and sad. Just residential neighborhoods completely occupied both by men with very large guns and little scruples about how they operate, and then a larger number of people opposing their presence, protecting their neighbors, blowing their whistles, doing anything they could to peacefully resist. So it's just the term that you think of is war zone. That's overstating it, but it's probably as close to that as I've ever experienced in the U.S. And here we are in this otherwise placid, picturesque, super quiet town where I spent my youth. It is really not some kind of corruption-plagued, chaotic place where you'd expect an action of this magnitude to take place.
It also has relatively few undocumented immigrants, which I think is maybe one of the surprising things for people to learn when they look at the scale of this, for lack of a better word, invasion. What have ICE officers really been doing in the city?
I guess to be cynical, just looking for reasons to arrest people. I shouldn't say arrest people, detain people, which is different than arrest. As you noted, the population of people they're said to be targeting is microscopic. And so what do you do then? You've got these quotas you have to meet every day. The administration looks at the numbers, and they just look at the numbers. They don't look at, public safety or other factors. And so these agents who are there with this mission and directive to arrest people and produce numbers need to find other excuses other than you're an undocumented immigrant. And so the idea that kind of like you're safe if you have papers, if you're a citizen, it just didn't hold up. Left and right were stories of people who are U.S. citizens who had papers on them being detained and sometimes arrested, often in fairly violent ways, simply for unknown reasons. And the bulk of that burden fell to non-white people, including off-duty police officers who were targeted at like the same rates as anyone else with black or brown skin.
It's been interesting hearing people from Minneapolis and St. Paul and the surrounding area. It seems like this has not been just limited to the cities themselves, but it has really spilled out into the metropolitan area depending on where you are. As people have been experiencing this, how have people reacted? Because when I think about it happening here in Milwaukee, I know how some community groups would respond, but I don't really know how I think individual neighbors, community members might respond to this moment.
The response has been unified in just outrage at what's happening, mainly because people see the results of this to people they know and trust, people who run the dry cleaner or operate their restaurants or who they see on the bus. These families getting torn apart, sometimes for good and legal and just reasons, but more often than not in a way that's rather indiscriminate. And so that just produced this collective outrage that got a lot of people who wouldn't ordinarily consider themselves protesters or activists off the sidelines and into the streets, trying to find ways to resist in whatever way felt comfortable to them. So many people did behind-the-scenes kind of things, such as joining these food delivery services that would take meals and a week's worth of groceries to people who couldn't leave their home for fear of being detained. Other people volunteered to walk vulnerable people from their car to church or from their car to daycare or school. So just this huge constellation of people, of individuals finding ways to push back, both to protect people they know and to push back against what they felt was a unnecessary and unlawful incursion.
Sure. Now you mentioned some of the ways that community members have organized. As we look to the very real possibility that something like this could happen here in Milwaukee, what are the big lessons that we can take away, both as individual members of the community, how we might respond if we see this happening in our neighborhood, our community, but also community organizations that might have a better network already set up to respond to these kinds of things?
Yeah, it takes all hands, but it takes a lot of organization. And one thing that struck me about the movement there was its decentralized nature. There wasn't one group who took the lead and kind of spoke for everyone. There wasn't one person. It was every block had its organization that communicated via Signal and other encrypted messaging apps. And every neighborhood, it was a very hyper-localized response, which seemed to really work, even though they weren't communicating a ton. The other thing that was somewhat unusual about this is the unified political response. In Minnesota, the mayors, the governor, the attorney general, the police chiefs, they all spoke with one voice. They're all Democratic, and there was no dissension or wavering in their messaging. It was very, very targeted and focused, and they were all, singing from the same hymn book, which, in other places, in more mixed political places like here, it wouldn't quite be the same. So yeah, those are a couple of things. And then just the power of visuals. People out there with their phones, taking videos, taking photos, distributing them on social media and regular media. Those things turn the tide. Just seeing what was happening turned the tide in a way that I don't think, writing stories necessarily did.
Sure. This is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers, and I'm speaking right now with Dan Simmons. He's a writer who traveled up to his hometown, St. Paul, to report on the response to ICE in their community. Now, you mentioned, of course, the political response in Minneapolis, in Minnesota in general, was pretty coordinated and cohesive. We can't necessarily anticipate having that same kind of response if something were to happen here in Milwaukee, but we do have things that are already happening at the city level, plans that we've heard about from the state itself. Do you know what that legislation looks like?
Yeah, I've seen what's been reported on about it. And the caution I would add is ICE doesn't follow the rules as you might expect from a law enforcement agency. You can put ordinances in place telling them where they can and can't stage and such, and telling them how they can operate, masks or no masks. History so far tells us that they will sort of ignore those where it suits their purposes. The chief judge in Minnesota called them out for violating more court orders in a month than most federal agencies have in their history. So it's laudable, but perhaps not to its intended effect, to have a lot of laws and provisions in place because, they just don't really follow them.
They've often decided that they're above the law. If it's a city law, a state law, it seems that ICE and the Department of Homeland Security has decided that they cannot be held accountable to the law.
That is generally accurate.
Yeah. As we look toward a future where we're likely to have some ICE activity, even if it's not what we're seeing in Minneapolis and St. Paul, even if it's something that is a much smaller scale, how would you encourage people to prepare themselves?
Get involved with your neighbors as early as possible. A lot of people have neighborhood group chats, through Facebook and everything. So those kind of things really go into hyperdrive when this kind of activity comes to town. And reach out to existing groups in Milwaukee. There's Voces de la Frontera and similar groups who are good at coordinating responses and sort of making sure people aren't duplicating efforts and stepping on each other's toes. And then giving money to these groups, being involved in church communities. And in Minnesota, faith communities played a huge role in outreach and support to people, but also in organizing marches and getting arrested and doing things to really raise awareness.
All right. Well, we will see what the future holds here in Milwaukee. Dan, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, Joy.
Dan Simmons is a local journalist, and he spoke with Lake Effect's Joy Powers. Simmons wrote about his experience in his hometown, St. Paul, Minnesota, during the large-scale ICE operation for the New Republic. We'll look into Milwaukee's missing street signs in about 15 minutes. But first, we'll speak with two Milwaukee filmmakers about their documentary that looks into the unsolved death of a civil rights leader in the 1960s. That's coming up next on Lake Effect on WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. In 1967, Wallace Jackson Sr. was killed by a bomb planted in his truck. Jackson was an NAACP leader in Natchez, Mississippi, a town known for Ku Klux Klan activity. His murder remains unsolved, and a documentary called American Reckoning explores how the events surrounding his death unfolded. Filmmakers Brad Lichtenstein and Yoruba Richin use rare archival footage from the 1960s to highlight the civil rights movement and black resistance in Natchez. They both join me in 2022 to share more about American Reckoning. So to start, why Natchez, Mississippi?
Well, this is a project that actually dates back to 2014. And brief little backstory, Congressman John Lewis had a lot to do with why we made this film. I had met him and first started what became a lifelong friendship when I was 15 years old, working for his first congressional campaign that was successful when he was elected back in 1985, 1986. And cut to many years later, I was in his office. We were talking about some different projects. And his press secretary was with us, Brenda Jones, and she pointed me in the direction of the cases that were to be re-examined by the Emmett Till Act, which Congressman Lewis authored and which was passed in 2008. And then once he pointed me in that direction, and I started looking at the different people who were included on that list of cases, over 150, I saw that there were some in Natchez, Mississippi, and that there was this film, Black Natchez, that had been made during that time. And then a few phone calls after that discovered that there was all of this footage that had been shot and not used in the film, but they were outtakes, and that they actually included a lot of the story of Wallace Jackson Sr. So that's kind of how we landed in Natchez and in the story of Wallace Jackson.
Yoruba, could you share a little more about this rare archival footage and how you and Brad came together to be on this project?
Yeah, so Brad and we met at a ITVS confab back in 2012 and then stayed in touch through the years. In 2016, we were both at Sundance and we ran into each other and we, as you're wont to do at Sundance, talked about projects we were pitching and projects we were working on and developing and trying to fundraise for. And Brad told me about American Reckoning. And I was immediately intrigued because of the story. And then he sent me the first trailer that he did, which was so powerful. And I saw this incredible archive footage that I'd never seen before. And that told the story of what was happening in Natchez at the time, which the story I did not know in terms of the civil rights struggle there. And then when I delved deeper and found out that the Deacons for Defense and Justice were part of this story, it really sealed the deal for me because I had heard of the Deacons and knew a little bit about them, became kind of obsessed because they'd been so erased from our history, and that their story was part of the American Reckoning story was really exciting to me. And that's how I came to be involved in the project. And here we are.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Deacons for Defense and Justice, their story is often excluded and written out. And I'm sure, especially for many white audiences, this might be the first time they're even becoming aware of such a group. And it's really the black resistance to the white terrorism happening, and especially in Mississippi. Can you share a little more about the boycott of downtown Natchez? Because I feel like often in the American civil rights movement, it's centered or reduced to simply Martin Luther King Jr. and the nonviolent movement. But what was the strategy for the Deacons of Defense and Justice?
The boycott that you mentioned is a big piece of the story that we tell in American Reckoning, central to the efforts that were going on with the NAACP, which Wallace Jackson was the treasurer for. And Charles Evers, Medgar Evers' brother, was the secretary for the entire state, and he was in Natchez. Central to their strategy to be able to get demands met, and demands about access to education, access to public amenities, putting black police officers onto the force, things like that, was a boycott. And a boycott was necessary because the white power structure wasn't yielding in Natchez. And, I should point out that the civil rights movement is often a tale of a few iconic figures, but there were actually foot soldiers all over communities all over America, and especially in the South in the 60s. And this is one of those stories. The boycott is something that was so important because it's what changed the outcome of things. And the Deacons, while they were not the organizers of the boycott, they helped to enforce the boycott. And I'll pass it to Yoruba to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I found so fascinating in making the film, that not only were the Deacons defending the community against white terrorism and Klan violence, they had to enforce the boycott. You have to make sure people aren't breaking it. And, Charles Ever has this line. He says, we have a right to discipline our own people. Sometimes this stuff isn't pretty in terms of how you make change. But they made sure that Black people did not break the boycott. And the white business structure, power structure, crumbled in a very short time period. And it's because of that strict discipline around the boycott that changes were made. And they became a model for other boycotts around Mississippi.
Brad, you mentioned this name, and we'll circle it back here. One key component of your film is the Jackson family. Their father, Warless Jackson Sr., was the treasurer of the local NAACP branch and the target of a second bombing in the same community in 1967. So how did you both come to know and be trusted by the Jackson family to help share their story?
Well, of course, every documentary involves a deep level of trust, and that's something that's earned over a period of time. When I first met Warlist, this was before Yoruba was involved in the project, I went down to Natchez, and really the only appointment I had was with Stanley Nelson, who's an investigative reporter that you meet in our film too, because he investigated the murderers. He investigated the Silver Dollar Group, a subset of the Klan that not only was responsible for Warless Jackson's murder, but for others as well. And, when I met Warless Jr., I just said what I was interested in doing and suggested that if he was interested in talking more about it, just to come meet me at a park. And I went and hung out at this park because I guess I felt like it was really important that with something like this, give him the space to reflect and think about it. This is a conversation he wants to continue. And he did come, thankfully, to the park later that day. And one of the first things we did was just drive around Natchez. I just asked him to share with me, his version, what does Natchez look like to him? And then I met his sister, I met Denise. And from there, we just grew a relationship. Eventually, when Yoruba came on board, she got to know them as well. And, now we're all in this together.
Yoruba, what struck you about the Jackson family?
Yeah, I mean, it was first off, it's such a responsibility to be entrusted with stories that you're telling, any story that you're telling. So, and especially this one that is so painful, so traumatic for the family. And so they were so generous with sharing their stories and giving us access to their emotions, to, what images they had, documents that they had. And I'm so happy that we finally got to do it, because it took a minute. But, part of the healing process, I think, is telling the story. I mean, that's what Denise has said, getting the story out there and honoring her father and the sacrifice that he's, sacrificed his life for change. The other thing that struck me is how Warless really tried to protect his children from the violence that was going on. They didn't talk about it a lot. They didn't talk about what he was doing. And this is in many Black families because it's dangerous to talk about this stuff. It just was so striking to me that, that he kept this part of his life his own. He knew the danger, and he was trying to protect his family.
Well, and the fact that it was only one generation removed, and the Emmett Till legislation trying to bring justice to some of these families, and in the case of the Jackson family, there still aren't official answers. But what do you think your film offers to not just this family story, but this event and the many similar events like it?
I think it offers again, lifting up these foot soldiers of the movement who we don't hear about. And so lifting up, Wallace Jackson. And it also begs the question of what is justice? Since we are not going to get, the family's not going to get, someone in jail for this. They're all dead, the people who did this. It forces us to ask the question, what is justice? And have a question about reparations. I mean, these were families that were hurt, were traumatized, and reparations is about repair, right? And this and so many other stories is an example of where, we really need to discuss what reparations would be and what do they want for reparations. Some may want money, some may want services, some may want an honor, a museum built in their honor. I mean, there are many different ways that reparations should be understood. And I think that this film, we end with that. We leave with that.
Well, I'm glad your film exists to help with this process and help get not just the Jackson family story out there, but many like it. And Brad Yoruba, I want to thank you so much for joining me to talk about it today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, appreciate you wanting to talk about it.
Yoruba Richin and Brad Lichtenstein are the co-directors and co-producers of American Reckoning. We spoke in 2022. You can watch the documentary anytime online on PBS Frontline. Lake Effect is available as a podcast so you can listen when you like. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, then subscribe, download, and listen on demand. In about 10 minutes, we'll bring you a new Bubbler talk about the Skylight Theater and its French decor inspiration. But first, have you noticed that some streets in Milwaukee aren't marked with a street name sign? We'll find out why next on Lake Effect on WUWM. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Have you ever been trying to navigate around Milwaukee and noticed that some streets aren't properly marked? Milwaukee has a missing street sign problem, and it's something that WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez looked into.
I'm WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez, and today I'm riding shotgun in Bayview.
This intersection is a mess. Visually.
This is Amy Carlson, and I met up with her and her mom, Rita Herman.
But here, we're standing on Clement and Kinnickinnick.
You wouldn't know that.
You might catch the Clement. You won't find a Kinnickinnick sign on this intersection at all. And it's a signalized intersection. It's a red light.
I knew where I was just because it's KK and I'm in Milwaukee. However, if you're moving back or you're just new to the city, you have no idea what street this is. You don't even know how to pronounce Kinnickinnick. So, let alone find it. Amy and I are both originally from Milwaukee, both moved away and recently came back home. And coming back home, there's something that we both noticed.
I posted on Reddit, what's up with the street signs in Milwaukee?
What's up with them? Like, where are they? Why do so many streets seem to be missing them? She asked Bubbler Talk to find out. Amy wasn't alone here. Dozens and dozens of people on Reddit responded to her post. A week later, a new post asking the same question popped up. So, does Milwaukee have a signage problem? I reached out to Common Council members on the Public Works Committee. Only Councilmember Robert Bauman got back to me. He was short, basically saying he's never heard about or noticed this problem. And if people do have a problem, they can report it to the city.
I find that really humorous because I'm supposed to report a missing sign, but if the sign's missing, I don't know what street I'm on.
Basically, not helpful, Bob. Amy wants to know if the city is doing anything proactive to address this problem. Wisconsin DOT standards say street name signs should be on all intersections, including urban areas. But these are questions for municipalities. So, let's ask the city.
This is electrical services. We handle all the city's streetlights, all the traffic signals, all the long line painting, so the the lane markers.
This is Mark McCrae, operations manager here for the city.
And then we've got our own manhole crews working on our manholes, and then we have the sign shop, which actually makes and installs. And we don't make all of them, but we make the majority of the signs in the city, and we install them.
A little bit happens here.
Yeah, and then there's a couple other things they're thrown in for good measure just because they like to make my life interesting.
Drive by the DPW building and it looks never-ending, like a nondescript block-long warehouse. Walking in, there's an oversized bay, rusted-out trusses, old brick covered by chip paint, vinyl floors, harsh lighting, and still, pure magic. Tyann, or Ty Hardman, is a sign shop supervisor. She's been with the city for over 25 years. Have you all seen an increase in demand for signs? I'm thinking of like reckless driving or like anything like that. Has there been an increase in that, or has that felt fairly level since you both have been here for like 20 plus years?
An increase, especially holidays, weekends, summertimes. When people are drinking, accidents, icy road conditions.
So a sign might be down for a week, and we just don't come across it. Now, if we come across it, we deal with it.
This is Kurt Campagna, utility manager here. He's been with the city for almost 30 years.
So the 414-286-CITY is the way to report it. The quicker you report it, the quicker we can address it.
Okay, some answers. So if you do spot a sign down, you can call the number, or you can head to the city's website. You can also try to bother your older person, or you can post on Reddit. It's basically a choose your own adventure. When the sign shop does get word of a missing street sign, they say that street sign should be replaced in 1 to 3 weeks, depending on other jobs. Here, it's basically like a triage system. Missing stop signs and one-ways, things like that are prioritized. Street signs come after. When I asked specifically, what streets get signs? Should every main street and cross street have signage? Yeah, turns out they should. And there's a way they even keep track.
Check the official record book. Okay. Is there supposed to be a sign there? Oh, yes, it is. And then we replace it.
Wait, where is this official record book? Is this off limits? Okay. Because I would love to see the record book.
It's top secret. It's top secret.
Yeah, there's the sheer volume that we run through here. We've gone through with Alders. They're just shocked by the amount of material that we're actually processing through here. It's pretty impressive once you get back there.
Let's get back there. Just about any sign you see on the street, no parking, loading zone, temporary tow zone, comes from right here. Here's how it works. So first, they design it.
Meter parking signs that we're making.
Oh, the very controversial meter. Then they cure and print the material.
See the light. Oh, yeah.
They cut it, and they smooth and paint it.
That's also done by our painters. They don't only do printing, they also do the painting of metal.
Within the past 2 years, DPW has gotten a lot of new tech. A brand new printer and this laser cutter. Jobs that would have taken hours for a single sign now take less than 15 minutes. And they can bulk produce.
Now I got a street name sign that I'm putting together. If you want to see,
I mean, that is what the story is. This is Larry Jackson. He's been working with the city for the past 17 years, working on press equipment for 15 plus years.
I do the same thing to the other side, and we got a street name sign.
Okay, all right. And he is the man behind your street sign. Today, that's Hampton Ave.
I guarantee there's a street on Hampton waiting for that, too.
Yes, it is. That's what these are for.
Yeah.
We had this sign already in stock.
Okay.
So he was able to pull it from the stock room. These are such a hot commodity. We use them so often that we can't keep it stocked.
Can't keep it stocked.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talking with Larry about the signage missing in Hampton, it sounds like it was an accident that took the sign out. Now, without signage, this is an even more dangerous intersection. This was something question asker Amy Carlson and I talked about too. Why good street signage matters.
Outside of maybe missing your reservation, what do you think are the issues with a place lacking signage or a city lacking signage?
I think it's a real possibility for a traffic accident because somebody's looking for a street sign and they're not paying attention to their driving. And that's when inattentive driving is when you get into the worst accidents, you know?
I talked with a few personal injury attorneys about this and asked, is this something that they've seen? Answers are mixed. But Ed Robinson, partner at Milwaukee's Cannon & Dunphy, said basically if you're in an accident looking for a street sign, that's on you, not the city. But even though there's really no legal recourse, municipalities still have a responsibility to address missing signage as soon as possible. The problem is, When a city budget's strapped, like Milwaukee's, and we spend almost half the budget on policing, it leaves other departments fighting for scraps. While the sign shop has received new tech, they've also lost key personnel. Sure, making street signs is more efficient, but Larry was hand-pressing those street signs. There's no shortcuts there. We just need more Larrys.
That's probably the biggest issue that Milwaukee's facing is it's an infrastructure problem where a lot of these things in a newer, growing city would be replaced with good infrastructure finances.
So, does Milwaukee have a signage problem? Depends on who you ask. Does it have a team of skilled workers who can do the work? Absolutely. Could the city use more investment to become a safer and more welcoming place? Sounds like it.
That was WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez reporting.
Bubbler Talk, quenching Milwaukee's thirst for knowledge.
I'm WUWM reporter Catherine Kokel. This week on Bubbler Talk, we're taking a walk down Broadway. Like actual Broadway, the long street that runs through downtown Milwaukee and ends in the 3rd Ward. Right before Catalano Square, there's a theater on the east side of the street. It's the Skylight Music Theater. It's a brick building with long, narrow windows and accents that are the color of oxidized copper. Brian Casey of Whitefish Bay wrote into WUWM concerning a rumor that he'd heard about the theater, which mostly puts on musicals.
My question was, I had heard that the Skylight Music Theater in the 3rd Ward was designed after a theater somewhere in France, and I was curious to know more.
So I went to find out. I met with Executive Director Susan Varela out in the lobby of the theater. She wasted no time in getting me into the main attraction.
We are entering the Cabot Theater. Thank you. Wow. So this is our Cabot Theater, and I invite you to come down the aisle with me because you need to see the full effect of this gorgeous space that we call home.
Oh my gosh, wow. The space I was standing in had rounded Baroque-style balconies with classical light fixtures that overlook seats for 349 people. In the theater world, 349 is intimate.
What you see here on the inside is not at all what you think that you're going to see on the outside.
I would have never guessed this driving up. We're in the 3rd Ward, and it's like, I feel like I'm stepping back in time to a European country.
Yes. Well, to be specific, it would be France, and to be more specific, Roquefort, France.
The theater there is called the Théâtre de la Coupe d'Or, which, if you can believe it, was first established in 1766. When I contacted the theater, they said they were so delighted to learn that their historical theater had une petite sœur, a little sister, in the United States. There are a few main differences between the Coupe d'Or and the Skylight. Here's Varela, back in Milwaukee.
This swag curtain that you see above our proscenium arch is a practical curtain, as we say. It's a real curtain. Theirs is painted on. However, they have an actual dome, whereas ours is painted to look like a dome. And their seats are red and ours are skylight blue.
So I answered the question about whether the Skylight Theater had been created to resemble a European model. But I also just had to know why this theater in France. For that, I called up the man behind the recreation.
My name is Colin Cabot, and I started out as assistant to Claire Richardson in the old days in the theater in 1974. And then when he died in 1981, I became the managing director of the Skylight Comic Opera at that point.
You may remember Cabot because the interior theater now bears his name. Cabot is one of the founders of Skylight Music Theater. In the late 80s, he was on a mission to find a European theater design that he liked and could replicate here in Milwaukee. Cabot and his family were trudging through Western Germany, touring theater after theater. But the path to enlightenment truly began, as it should, over a plate of Italian food.
So when we were in Offenbach, we asked a waiter in an Italian restaurant if he knew of any theaters in Europe. And he said, I'll tell you that the most beautiful Baroque theater in all of Europe is in Rochefort-sur-Mer on the south of Atlantic coast. It's a Théâtre à l'Italienne, an Italian theater. And I said, well, how do you know about this? He said, well, I'm from Morocco. But I worked for the RAI in Italy, which is the Italian radio station. And we did a program on how to paint Baroque theaters.
What a quintessentially European experience to learn about a theater in France from a Moroccan-born person who worked in Italy and is now serving you as a waiter in Germany.
In an Italian restaurant, right? Yeah,
in an Italian restaurant, right? What a dream. With full bellies and a recommendation in hand, they set out to southwestern France. Sure enough, Cabot fell in love. He used a digital ruler to take measurements of the space, and they photographed every last inch so that they could come home with the correct plans. The skylight underwent its renovation in 1992. To this day, the little slice of Baroque Europe stands out in Milwaukee. It reflects a dream that crossed an ocean and stands as a celebration of all of the talent that crosses the stage at Skylight Music Theater.
And Bubbler Talk wraps up Lake Effect for today. If you've missed any of the show this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take Lake Effect on the go, simply download our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Join us again tomorrow to hear some of our top stories of the week, including a conversation with the Berkey baby. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.